Hello everyone. In this video I would like to show you how you can implement in Blazor something like a tree view similar to what you can see in the Solution Explorer in Visual Studio. So let's go to new project, Blazor WebAssembly app empty. You can type Blazor here as well, and you should be able to find that template. I'm going to be using Blazor WebAssembly, but this should work in Blazor server as well, at least for the most part. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Blazor app, let's call it tree view. Next, I'm leaving the default settings. Okay, so we are here. So this is what I'm talking about, something that can represent a hierarchy of items, items that can be nested, such as files and folders. So it can be collapsed, it can be expanded, and so on and so forth on many levels, like here for example. So well, in desktop application it can be used to represent the file structure of some folder or some directory, and so on and so forth, which may not be the case in your web application, but maybe you still want to represent something that has a similar hierarchy, some content or something that reflects how your content is laid out on your web page. But anyway, in this particular approach I'll be using recursion. So because we don't really know how deeply nested it will be, so we want it to be able to take pretty much any number of levels and handle that easily. So that's the approach I'm going to use, but it's not necessarily the optimal approach in your case. For example, you may be dealing with what I would call flat data. Then you may consider ditching recursion altogether. Well, as long as you can somehow infer the level of nesting from your data items. Well, that said, I still think that the recursive approach is better in certain aspects, at least, because it won't allow things like children items without parent items, which actually makes quite a lot of sense under normal circumstances. But anyway, let's dive right into it. Maybe let's just go to the app CSS file. I'm gonna remove the content. Even though the template says it's empty, we can still find a lot of code just floating around those files. We may not necessarily need it. So let's go to index.html as well. Let's try to uncomment this part, because we're gonna need this if we want to use files or component scoped style sheets. That's what we need. And let's delete the part that deals with errors, and we should be good to go. So first of all, let's go ahead and add a new folder. Let's call it models, even though we're gonna have one, but still you may want to add more in the future. So we're gonna say new class. I'm gonna call it tree view item. It's gonna have some properties here. So first of all, it's gonna display some text. Let's call it text. And then it may also have children, so we're going to say list. tree view item. It can be null. Let's call it children. So it can be nested within itself. That's why I mentioned recursion before. So, and then we're gonna give it two flags basically to tell us whether it's currently collapsed. So get set, and if it's currently selected. Because typically what we want is something like this, where you can have only one selection at the same time, even though I probably try to show you how you can select multiple items as well. So let's come back here, and we're going to say we're going to have one more property here. Has children, to tell us whether it has children or not, or whether it has something nested inside it. So you're going to use an expression bodied property for that, using the arrow syntax. Children not null, and just for the sake of clarity, let's also say children any, because it may be, or it may be not equal. It may not be equal to null, but it may not have any children, so we don't want that case either. And maybe some constructor as well that will help us initialize it. Let's maybe just give it some default settings here. So we're going to say null, collapsed, false, selected, false, and we should be ready with this file. So let's go ahead to pages, add new Blazor component. Let's call it tree view. And maybe let's add a corresponding style sheet. New item, CSS, tree view, Blazor CSS. Also maybe for the index page or index component, index Blazor CSS. Alright, so let's go over to this tree view component, and we're gonna add some properties here as well that will also be its parameters. So first of all, we need that list of items. Tree view item, but we have to import it using Blazor tree view models. So we need to import it to be able to use it here. Okay, so we're gonna have those items. Get set. It can be null. Next parameter. It's gonna be level. So by default, we're going to be on the first level, level 1. So get set 1. And one more parameter, which is actually an event callback. We're going to say public event callback. and it's going to take tree view item, so that we can pass it somewhere and probably do something with the data contained within that, tree view item. Of course, now it's kind of empty except for, its children and so on and so forth, and the text. But maybe in your case it would contain some other properties or other fields that you could use in your application. So we're going to say on select. So this usually will be fired when the item is selected. So get set. Right, so let's go over here and start writing some markup code. So if items is not null, then we're going to do something. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to loop through those items here. So for each item and items, we're gonna create a list item, this HTML element. And here's my suggestion. Well, I suggest that you not include list items within list items, because if you do that, then for example, if you want to change the background color, then it will probably affect the descendants of that item as well, or the children and so on and so forth. So what I suggest you do is that you basically make them like siblings, except that you use different indentation levels, like here, right? So may add some padding to the left and so on, so that you can differentiate like visually between those different levels. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do here. So we're gonna say class, let's call it item for now. We're gonna style it a bit later. And here we're gonna say if this item is selected, then also add the selected class to it. But if it's not selected, don't add anything, right? So as I said, you can add some styling here to differentiate like visually those different levels. So we're going to say padding left. It's going to be dependent on the level of nesting. So let's say level times 16, let's say 16 pixels. So that's what I'm going to use. And then if this item has children, so we're going to say if this item has children, then we're going to add some character to represent this collapse state as well as the expanded state, right? So those two states. And for that I'm going to use those two characters, those two arrows or triangles with their respective codes here. Of course you can use something else, but this is close enough, so that's what I'm going to use. So it's just going to say span, let's say class arrow, and basically if this item is collapsed. Then we're going to use this one. And if it's expanded, then we're going to use this guy. Right, so, and if we click on it, just like here, it should change to the other one. So basically, we're going to include an on-click directive here with a lambda function that will basically say item is collapsed and set it to the opposite of the current state. And just in case, we're going to stop propagation so that, for example, if we click on this, it will just, you know, be collapsed instead of being highlighted, right? So then if it has no children, then we're just going to add some placeholder here. Let's say arrow placeholder. Right, so after that comes the actual text of the element. So class, let's call it text, and item text. And here's where recursion comes in. Just after that, after closing that element, we're going to say if item has children and it's not collapsed, then we're gonna call or include this element within itself. I'm gonna say tree view, and it's gonna take those items, the children actually, of this current item. Also, you're going to set the level to the current level plus 1, because as we go deeper and deeper, those numbers will increase. They will help us, know whether we are on the top level or not. Okay, so we have it out of the way now. And let's create some methods here. For example, method that will say that will be triggered when an item is selected. So we're going to say private, probably going to make it async. So say item selected. So tree view item selected item. Well, first of all, we want to invoke this callback. So we're going to pass selected item here. So await. So on select. Let's go back here. I say on select item selected. right? So the idea here is to pass the signal all the way up to the first level, to the, you know, the top level ancestor in this case. Okay, so once we have it, we can actually go to the index page. If I can find it here, yeah, index page, remove the hello world. Maybe let's type a UL tag here. Just call it tree view. And inside those tags, we will actually have our element, tree view. We probably need some sample data. So private list tree and tree view item. Let's go sample data. And now let's try to add some levels here. So new tree view item, let's call it item 1. Maybe we can also add another item here, item 2. And let's nest them a bit. So new this tree view item. And again here, inside this, we're gonna have another item. Let's go to 1, 2, 1.2, and maybe another one, the third one. Okay, so 1, 1 actually. 1, 2 will be here, and 1, 3. Let's say we want to nest this one as well. Let's say 1, 2, 1, right? So just some sample data. So let's use it for now. And then let's say when it's selected, we want to print the name or the text from the selected tree view item. So console right line item text. Well, let's try to run this for the first time and see what happens. Well, we can see some items right there. And we can see that it kind of works, except that we have to do some styling and something that will actually allow us to select those items. All right. So we actually have to hook it up to the onClick directive. So we're going to say item selected. We're going to pass the current item. So let's see. And now we can see that it actually prints out the text of the item at the top level here. right? Because it's like at the very top. Okay, so now let's just try to do some styling to make it look better. So let's start actually here. Let's start from the item. Let's make it flex, margin 0, list style type none, and maybe cursor pointer. Okay, so you see the difference. And now I'm going to say item hover. So we're going to change the background color. Let's say maybe azure. So you can see it's working. And then we're going to say, well, when it's selected, then change the background color to maybe light blue. And actually we need to select it in the code because it hasn't been done yet, I think. Okay, so we have this item selected method here, and yeah, we have to say if, and we're gonna do it from the top level because we don't really want to keep repeating it, on every level, because it could even lead to like infinite recursion. So just do it from the top level. And if you want to be able to select like multiple items, and you could say item or selected item rather. Selected item is selected and set it to the opposite of that value. So let's see how it behaves now. Yeah, it's selected. As you can see, we can select multiple items and deselect them by clicking on them again. But so yes, this is one approach, but may not necessarily be your use case, or maybe you want to have an alternative in your application. You want to be able to select it this way or that way. But let's just focus on the method where you can select only one at a time, and the others are automatically deselected, or they're not highlighted anymore if you select a new item. So maybe let's just write a helper method here. So we're going to say private void update selection. So it's going to have to basically traverse the lists, on the number of levels it has currently, and select or deselect those items that have to be either selected or deselected. So that's the general idea. So tree view item, let's call it items, and tree view item selected item. So you're gonna loop through those items. So we're going to say selected item, or rather item is selected if this current item is equal or is the same as the selected item, right? So, and then if that item has children, then we're gonna call this method on itself, because again we don't know how many levels of nesting it has. We're gonna say item children and selected item. And it's gonna yell at us because it says possible null reference argument for parameter items. But actually here, if you look, we're checking it for null and even for whether it has actually has any children. So we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to add an exclamation point here so that it won't yell at us anymore. So we have this update selection method here. So we're going to comment this part out, and we're going to use the newly written method. So we can say here items and selected item, and we're going to add the exclamation point again to indicate that it's not null. Right, so let's try to run this and see what happens. Okay, so we select this one, we can see it displayed here, and we select this one, and we can see as we change the current selection, the other one is, or the previous one is not highlighted anymore, and that's basically what we wanted. So let's go back and do some more styling there. So in this file right here, I'm going to say item arrow, and also the same for the placeholder. I'm going to set the minimum width to 16 pixels, just the same number as we used for the indentation level here, or for the padding here. And then we gonna say user select none, so that user cannot actually highlight it, because, well, that would be there wouldn't really be any point in doing that. Okay, so we're gonna say item arrow on hover. It's just gonna maybe change the color a little bit, so some shade of blue, let's say steel blue. We can see it changes the color a little. And that's maybe what else can we do? Oh, maybe here, let's say tree view. I'll just say padding 0. Let's mark its border 1 pixel solid red. Okay, so we can see it better. Maybe width 300 pixels, height 500 pixels. Yeah, so this is what we get here. And of course we could add those levels of nesting. Maybe let's try. Okay, so let's say we want to add one more level here. Say 1, 2, 1, 1, and so on. Let's run it again. And there you go. As you can see, we can nest those items on any number of levels basically, and it should be flexible enough. So that's at least one method of doing it, one way you could do it. As I said, you may or may not need recursion in your particular case, but still I hope you found this video useful. Well, if you did, you can hit that like button, and please also consider subscribing if you like my content, so I can continue making these videos. And that's basically it for this video, and bye.